Hello guys, this is starting your DevOps journey with GitHub Actions. My name is Kubia Morgan and I will be your instructor for today. So a little heads up, to get the most out of the video you actually have to have some basic experience collaborating on GitHub, right? Nothing too advanced, just the basics, push, pull request and the rest. Let's try to note some concept that we are going to use as we go along. Git is a version control software that is fundamentally used to track changes, right, in files in a project. Though Git does a whole lot of other things, this is its fundamental approach. Now, GitHub happens to be a platform that leverages the Git software to provide collaboration tools for developers. And then Git Actions is simply a tool for automating software workflows. Important to note this definition, right? It's a tool for automation, okay, of software workflows. So it could be anything from testing to deployments, code reviews, let your imagination run wild. Now we're going to be using Node.js to set up our project for this particular tutorial. Node.js is basically a runtime for executing JavaScript outside the browser. So prior to Node.js, JavaScript was only executed in a sandbox in the browser, right? So you could not run JavaScript on places like servers, embedded systems, and the rest. Okay, so Node.js enables that. Express is a web framework, for Node.js, and we're going to be using Mocha and Chai for our testing, right? So Mocha is a test framework for JavaScript and Chai is an assertion library. So let's take a better look at GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions essentially has to do with workflows. Remember, we talked about, or we defined it as a tool that automates software workflows. Okay, so it's essentially about workflows. And in this workflow, we have jobs that can be executed in these workflows. The execution of these jobs are defined by certain steps. These workflows can be triggered, right? Either manually or automatically. Now, automatically, it could be a push to a particular repository, or a pull request to a repository, or a fork of that particular repository. Any of these actions can possibly trigger a workflow, okay? And the jobs that are executed in this workflow are executed on things called runners, okay? Think of runners as systems, okay? And these systems have to have some sort of platform running on them. You're thinking of maybe something like Ubuntu or Windows, they need to have some sort of operating system running on them. The jobs are executed on those runners, and then the steps can be defined as series of commands, okay, series of bash commands or terminal commands, or it could be defined by actions. Actions is simply a group of commands that are they are packaged. So think of modules, okay, but in this case they are actions, okay, just a group of commands that makes it easy to reuse those commands later. There are some prepackaged commands. We have commands to set up node, commands to actions to set up Go. We have actions to check out a repository, etc. Okay, now the entire workflow, the entire structure that we've just looked at right now is being defined in a particular workflow file, right, that is written in YAML. YAML is a human-friendly language, for data serialization. Now that we have an idea, or we understand the structure of Git Actions, that Git Actions is essentially about workflows, and those workflows have jobs that can be executed in them, and these jobs that can be executed are defined by steps, okay, so set of actions, okay, that would execute these jobs in the workflow, right? And the workflow can be triggered. The jobs need to run on a particular platform, and then the steps also are like actions, and you could write your own steps and then upload them to the open source directory. So let's see this in action. Now we're just going to start by setting up our web server. I'm going to brush through this because this isn't the crux of the video, but head over to Node.js website to install Node.js for your specific platform, and then open up a terminal. and we're going to create our folder, our project folder, call it demo app. Then we're going to change directory into that project folder we just created. Then we're going to create two files, index.js and tests.js, right? Where index.js is going to contain our application code, and tests.js is going to contain the tests, that's the code for the test that we're going to be running on our web server, that's on the index.js file. Then we're going to run npm init. This command basically initializes our project folder as a node project. It is going to create two files on your project folder. It's going to create a package.json and a package.lock.json. The package.json contains information about your project as well as dependencies that your project would be using. Okay, so what we're going to do is install some dependencies. That's what we just talked about. And then we are going to proceed to actually configuring our web server, that's writing our web server. This code is going to go into your index.js file. And so what we're going to start with is by importing Express, which, as we defined earlier, is our web framework, our web server. Then we are going to configure that web server to listen to GET requests on this particular URL, that's /ping, that's localhost/ping, and then it's going to respond with hello world, just the text hello world. Okay, then we're going to start our web server on port 3000, and we're going to export all those configurations so that our test suite can use that to run tests on the web server. Okay, so that's just all with the index.js file. Then let's set up our test suite. This is going to go into your test.js folder. We're going to start off by importing all the dependencies that we're going to need, right? So starting from chai, then chai HTTP is what we are going to be using to make requests to our web server. And then of course we are going to import the configurations from our web server next. Now we're going to configure chai to use chai HTTP. So we're done with those configurations. Then we're going to describe our tests. Okay, so all we're going to do is we're trying to test if our server is going to say hello when once we make a request to that particular endpoint that we defined on our server, which is ping. We make a GET request to that endpoint, and then we are expecting, the text value of the response to equal hello world. So once we are done with the test, we want the web server to close. We exit the process there. Now let's look at how we can configure our test to run. So you're going to open up your package.json file that was initially created when you ran npm init. Then you're going to change the default script for the test and change that to what we have here. This is going to make sure that once you run npm test, Mocha is going to execute the test file that we just finished defining. So let's get right into it and then run our test on our local machine and see what our output would look like. I'm just going to run npm tests on our command line inside our project folder, mind you. The output is going to look something like this, right? So we can see here that it says that our tests that should say hello is passing. Okay, let's move quickly to setting up Git Actions itself. So to set up Git Actions, GitHub recognizes the workflow files inside a folder called .github, right? So we're going to create that folder, and then we're going to create another folder called workflows inside that folder. Then we're going to create our workflow file. We're going to just call it demo flow. Editing this file is where we're going to set up our workflow. So follow me closely. This is the most important part of this video. First of all, we're going to define the name of our workflow. We're just going to call it demo flow. You can give it any other name you want. Then we're going to specify a trigger. Remember that workflows need a trigger, whether it's manual or it's automatic. But in this case, we want our workflow to be executed anytime a push is made to the master branch of our repository. Next thing we're going to do is specify the jobs that will be executed when this workflow is triggered. We're going to give our job a name. We're going to call it run tests. And then we're going to specify the operating system that we want our job to run on. In this case, we want it to run on the latest version of Ubuntu. Then we are going to define the steps that will be necessary to execute our job. Very first thing we're going to do is to check out our code. Now, you're trying to set up a separate system, a separate computer to run your code. Okay, so if you bought a new computer, the first thing you most likely do is to install an operating system on it. Well, once you do that, then you can clone your code from GitHub, right? In this case, the step is using the checkout actions, right? It's already a predefined actions that does the bulk of, cloning your repository and everything and setting up your project folder. Next thing we're going to do is set up Node.js on that system, that Ubuntu system we're using. That's the runner in this case. So we're going to just make use of the setup node actions on GitHub. It's available, open source, and this action needs the node version variable to be able to ascertain the specific node version you want it to set up. Okay, so in this case we are setting up node versions 10.x. okay, and then we are going to set up another step to run our test. Okay, now to run our test, this particular one is different from the previous one. The previous ones were using predefined actions. That's why we were specifying that using the uses property. In this case, we are going to be running, we're not going to be using a predefined action, but we're going to be running our own set of commands. The first command we're going to be running is npm i, which is short for npm install. That is going to install all your dependencies, and then the next thing is going to be npm test, which is going to run the actual test suite. That is all for the workflow. Well, you're still here. You are actually very interested in this. And so thank you for hanging around. Let's wrap it up. So we're going to deploy to GitHub. Deploying to GitHub, you could just follow these steps, create a repository online, and then run this set of commands, changing your repo URL to obviously your repository URL. However, if you're executing this command and you run into some challenges, maybe some permission issues with workflows, you can easily create your workflow directly from the GitHub website. Okay, so just head over to your repository, click on actions, then you can click on new workflow. Then you will have a page that opens up. You select set up a workflow yourself, click on that. It will open up a workflow file for you where you can edit the file name and then copy and paste your workflow code inside the editor that you have there. And then you can just go ahead you can skip filling any of these things and just click commit new file. Just ensure that if you're following this step, make sure that you don't already have a github.github folder as we talked about on your project folder. If you already do, please delete it so you don't have merge conflicts. Okay, well, once we make that push, right, your workflow is going to be triggered, and this is what the output is going to look like. So we can see that our tests have been executed and they are all passing, so the job has been completed. This has been GitHub Actions, and there is so much you can do with Git Actions, from integration to deployment. So congratulations and thank you for sticking around. That's a wrap. See you guys. Bye.